Jesus was sad when we climbed the stairs. He was sad when we entered the upper room and took our places around the table. He was sad when we started to eat. But I didn't notice how sad he was until he opened his mouth and spoke those terrible, terrible words. It was Thursday evening, 1 hour after sunset. The windows and doors were locked. Lamp flames sent shadows into all corners of the room. Outside in the night, there were people looking to arrest Jesus, but inside, we were safe. We were like his family. His disciples, his closest friends. Jesus was our Lord and teacher, and we loved him. Well, but in those days, I figured I loved him most because he had given me a special name. I am Simon, the son of John, but Jesus called me Peter, which means rock. He said I was like a big stone, the kind you could build a building on. Oh, I loved him so much that sometimes it makes me laugh out loud. I also love to eat. That's what I was doing Thursday evening, and that's why I didn't know Jesus' sadness. I was eating roasted lamb and bread as thin as crackers. I was eating some leaves so bitter that they made my nose run, and I dipped them in a fruit sauce to take the bitterness away. I was chewing and swallowing, and suddenly Jesus said,
"One of you is going to betray me."
I stopped eating and saw that there were tears in Jesus' eyes. He was so sad, and these are the terrible words.
"This very night, one of you will lead my enemies to me, and they will tie me up, and then they will kill me."
What? Kill Jesus? All of us sat still and stared. Some of us said, "Is it me, Jesus? Is it me?" Only one of us kept eating. John sat between me and Jesus, so I nudged him and nodded toward the Lord. John knew what I meant. He leaned upon Jesus and whispered, "Who, Lord? Who could do such a thing?" Slowly, Jesus took some bitter leaves and reached to the dish of fruit sauce. Judas Iscariot, the only disciple still eating, was dipping his own leaves in that dish. And Jesus said,
"The one who is dipping with me, he will betray me."
Judas dropped the leaves and snatched his hand away. He bared his teeth in a grin. "Me, Lord?" he said. "You don't mean me?" Jesus said,
"What you have to do, go, do it quickly."
Right away, Judas got up and he tried to say something, but instead he opened the door and he went out into the night. No one moved. Chilly breezes caused the flames to flicker. Shadows troubled Jesus' face. I jumped up and slammed the door. Jesus ate nothing that night, yet he commanded us to eat and to drink. He took some bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to us, saying,
"Take this, eat it.
We did, but while we were chewing the bread, he said,
This is my body."
His body? Oh Lord, how could I swallow your body? Next, he took a cup of wine and thanked God and said,
"Drink this, all of you."
We obeyed him. But again, while we were taking little sips, he said,
"This is my blood, poured out for the forgiveness of sins."
Body and blood, now. Who could ever forget such a meal? My heart was hammering inside my chest. Surely this would be a night like no other night in all the world. An hour later, we were all walking down the streets of Jerusalem. For as long as 10 minutes, Jesus prayed out loud.
"Father, keep my friends safe from the evil one."
When he was done praying, he walked on in silence, thinking. We went through a city gate and crossed the Kidron Valley. Then we began to climb a path up the Mount of Olives. Suddenly, Jesus said,
"You are all going to run away from me tonight."
Sometimes my feelings are so strong that I talk before I think, so I shouted, not me, Lord. Everyone else might run away from you, but not me." Jesus came and put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me with his sad eyes.
"Peter, Peter, you will do worse than run away. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny me 3 times.
"No," I said. No. Even if I have to die, I will never deny you." When we reached the top of the mount, Jesus told the disciples to wait in the clearing while he prayed. Then he took John and James and me with him into the Garden of Gethsemane. What was that noise? It sounded like wind and dead trees. What was it? It was Jesus. He was groaning while he walked.
Oh, oh.
Finally, he stopped and told us to sit down, but he kept standing. Under 1,000 stars, I could see sweat on his forehead, sweat as thick as blood.
Oh, my friends, I am scared to death. Please keep watch with me.
Then he walked off into the trees. At first there was silence, and there was a heavy thump on the ground and Jesus groaning. Jesus had fallen down. I almost got up to turn to him, but then I heard his voice and I left him alone. He was crying,
Daddy, Daddy.
Jesus was sobbing like a little boy.
Oh, Father, take this cup of suffering away from me.
Over and over, softer and softer, he said these words like singing. I began to feel woozy in my head. He said,
But you, my God, let your will be done, not mine.
That's the last I heard. I cuddled against John's back and listened to the breezes and drifted. The next thing I knew, Jesus was standing over us, saying,
Get up, my betrayer is coming.
He turned and walked out of the garden. My whole body was tingling. The air was full of dreamy noises, metal clankings, feet marchings. What was happening? Oh no, I had been sleeping. I jumped up and ran after Jesus, and right away I saw the soldiers coming up the mount with their torches and swords, and here were the disciples all huddled together, and in the middle stood Judas Iscariot, grinning. As soon as he recognized Jesus, he raised his hand up and hollered, Hello, Master. The idiot, yelling as if they were miles apart. Now he crept toward Jesus, grinning and blinking and crouching down like a dog. When he was face to face with Jesus, Judas went up on his toes and said, My dear teacher, and kissed him. One of the soldiers shouted, Is that the man then? Judas stepped aside. The soldier came forward with a rope, and I went crazy with rage. I pulled out my sword and ran at the soldier and slashed his ear clean off his head. A bad swing. This time I took a deadly aim, but before I could attack, someone grabbed me from behind, someone very strong. He stripped the sword from my hand and yanked my arms back.
Everyone who takes the sword shall die by the sword.
It was Jesus. All my bones went soft as soup. I said, I'm only trying to help. But Jesus moved past me and picked up the ear that I had cut off and touched it to the side of the soldier's head and healed it. Now this is how bad the world was that night. The soldier whom Jesus had healed seized him and tied him tightly with the rope. And the disciples Jesus loved, they all ran away. Me, I didn't exactly run away from Jesus. I followed him, secretly. I snuck down dark alleys, keeping up with the tramp of the soldiers' feet. It was long past midnight, the stars were gone. A cold wind blew through Jerusalem. The city was dark and sleeping, all but the house of the high priest, where people were gathering with noise and torchlight. It was to that house, high on Zion, that the soldiers led my dear Lord Jesus. When they arrived, the iron gate swung open and they all marched into the courtyard. Just as the gate was closing, I saw John slip inside. John! I called, running up to the bars. Let me in! He heard me, but he pretended he didn't. John, it's me, Peter! He motioned for me to shut up, then moved to a young maid and murmured something behind her ear. She glanced my way. When she turned to see who had spoken to her, John had vanished. Frowning, then, and staring hard at my face, the maid came to the gate and opened it. I walked in as if I belonged there, but she kept staring. There were soldiers everywhere in the courtyard. They all had knives and swords, so I pulled my cloak up over my nose and crouched down by a fire. The girl was like a mosquito. She circled closer and closer. All at once she clapped her hands and exclaimed,
Yes, I do know you. You're a friend of the prisoner.
She poked a soldier and pointed to the window of a room where we could see Jesus standing.
This man is with that man in there.
When the soldiers started staring at me, I growled like a lion. I don't know what she's talking about. Then I got up and stalked across the courtyard to the window where Jesus was. It didn't take me long to realize that horrible things were happening in that room. People were screaming, "He's guilty! He's guilty!" He said he'd destroy the temple itself. I saw the high priest raise an oil lamp to Jesus' face and say,
I command you to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Are you the Christ, the Son of God?
The room fell silent. Jesus, gazing directly into high priest's eyes, said,
I am.
Blasphemy!
Cried the high priest as if someone had slapped him. He smashed the lamp and began to rip his clothes.
Jesus of Nazareth has sinned against the Most High God. What is your verdict? What shall we do with this man?
Kill him! Kill him! The people yelled. They hit Jesus. They spit on him. And they yelled, Put him to death! How could I watch that and do nothing? I was trying to figure out what to do when suddenly someone touched my arm. I jumped straight up and whirled around and found 3 soldiers and a servant all glaring at me. The one who touched me said, The maid was right. You are one of his followers. Not me, I shouted. I swear to you I'm not. The servant grabbed my sleeve and I said,
Liar, I saw you. The man whose ear you cut off. That man is my cousin.
This was more than I could take. I cursed and swore and roared. I have never even met the man named Jesus. With all my might, I tore my sleeve from the servant and spun around, and there in the window was Jesus, staring back at me, his eyes so sad, his eyes so very sad. And then the rooster started to crow. Maybe everyone in the world could hear that rooster crowing. Surely Jesus heard it. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. So I started to cry, and I started to run. Oh, well, I was a bad man now. I ran through the courtyard, I ran out the gate, I ran into the alley, and there I fell down on the ground and cried. All night long a man lay crying in the dark, dark alley of Jerusalem. And that man was me. I was such a bad man now, that I didn't deserve for people to like me. They shouldn't even look at me. So at dawn on Friday, I went into hiding. But let me tell you something, I still loved Jesus. Do you understand this? I wanted to be close to him. So wherever the soldiers took him, I followed, sneaking from hiding place to hiding place like a rabbit, like a robber, like the ugliest person in all the world. The ugliest, yes. A year ago, Jesus had called me by the ugliest name there is. At the time, I thought he was wrong, but now I guessed he was probably right. He had been teaching us the grand plan of his life, that he would go to Jerusalem, that he would suffer many things, that he would be killed. Killed! Well, from the moment I heard that plan, I hated it, and I told him so. He was teaching, and after 3 days, he was saying, I will rise again. But I wasn't listening. I walked straight up to him and said, God forbid that this should ever happen to you. And Jesus snapped his mouth shut. His eyes made sparks of fire, and he said,
Get behind me, Satan. If you hate this plan, you hate the ways of God. I come to give my life away for the lives of my people.
Satan. Jesus had called me by the ugly name of Satan. How could I let anyone look at me if he was right? That's why I hid myself all Friday long. But I never stopped loving Jesus. That is why, wherever they took him, I followed. Friday morning was gray and cold and wet. Even before the city woke up, the priests and soldiers led Jesus to the palace of the Roman governor.
Pontius Pilate, come out and judge this man, this Jesus of Nazareth. He is guilty of crimes deserving death.
The governor came out with a sneer on his face. He didn't like us Jews very much. He sat down in a big chair and said, It's raining. Hurry up and tell me why you think he should die.
For one, he tells people not to pay taxes to the emperor. For another, he says that he is king, Christ the king.
Pontius Pilate leaned forward to take the measure of this criminal. He gazed at a thin man with steadfast eyes and raindrops on his hair. The man was shivering in the cold. His face was bruised. The ropes cut into his skin, but he looked back at the Roman with no rage nor hate, just patience and a perfect knowing. Pilate said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said,
You say so.
Pilate squinted more closely at Jesus. Then he sat back and waved his hand to shoo the priests and soldiers away. "Go home," he said. "I don't find any fault in the man." The chief priest climbed halfway up the governor's steps and said,
Look harder, sir. He stirs up the citizens. He causes riots against your government.
More and more people were gathering now. The high priest turned to them and cried,
You know the evil of Jesus, don't you?
"He's a sly one," the people shouted. "Disloyal! Right, he breaks the laws of Moses and of Rome."
You see,
The high priest said to Pilate.
he's a rebel and a dangerous man.
Pilate said to Jesus, "How do you answer these charges?" Jesus stayed silent. Pilate said, "Have you nothing to say for yourself?" Nothing. Jesus stood like a white column, calm and kind. Okay, he said to the chief priest and the crowds. "I know what I'm going to do. I will release one prisoner, and I'll let you choose which one. Should I release the murderer named Barabbas, or should I release Jesus, the King of the Jews?" It was a trick, and I liked it. Barabbas was wicked. He truly belonged in jail. Surely no one would want him free in the streets. They had to pick Jesus. Pontius Pilate stood up to address the entire crowd. It was amazing how many people had come out in the drizzling rain. "Which man," he called out, "do you choose?" Immediately the people shouted, "Give us Barabbas!" Pilate was shocked. "Then what should I do with Jesus of Nazareth?" he cried. Louder than ever, the huge crowd thundered, "Crucify him!" Why? Why? What evil has he done? The high priest now stood equal to Pilate.
By our law, he ought to die because he called himself the Son of God.
Pilate cried, "Your laws are not my laws. Deal with him yourselves." Then the high priest delivered his final threat.
If you release this man, you are not a friend of Caesar. Anyone who makes himself king is an enemy of the real king, Caesar.
Pontius Pilate looked scared. 1,000 people were ready to riot, screaming, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" So the Roman governor sat down and shrugged his shoulders. He released the evil Barabbas. Jesus he ordered to be whipped and then to be crucified. What did I see that Friday? What sorrowful things did I witness? I saw my Lord and Jesus, bowed and bloody, trying to carry a heavy beam of wood. Criminals are supposed to carry part of their crosses out to the place of their dying, but Jesus kept falling down, so the soldiers commanded another man to carry the beam to a little hill called Golgotha. And what did I see? I saw the soldiers lay Jesus down on the ground. They stretched his arms to the end of the beam, then pounded spikes through his bones into the wood. I saw them lift the whole beam, up with Jesus hanging from it, up to the top of a very strong pole. They put a sign there that said, "Jesus, the King of the Jews." And then they came down and spiked his ankles to the pole. It was misty cold. The wind was blowing. All of Jesus' ribs were showing through his skin like a skeleton. But I heard him say this holy thing. He looked up then, and he looked down at the people around him. "Father, forgive them," he said. "They don't know what they are doing." It was so holy that I could hardly breathe. But all the people were laughing. They were pointing at him and sneering. He saved others, but he cannot save his own self. There were 2 thieves crucified with Jesus, one on his right and one on his left. The man on his left was laughing like everyone else. "Hey, you Christ," he said, "save yourself and save me too." But the man on his right said, "What's the matter with you? You and I deserve to die, but this man didn't do anything wrong." He lowered his voice and he whispered, "Jesus, Jesus, please remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus, I saw him look at that thief for a while, and he told him that he promised him that he would be in paradise with him. I, Simon Peter, hiding from everyone and from everything, I wished that Jesus were speaking to me. Now the clouds grew thicker and darker. A true rain started to fall. People ran back into the city until the only ones left on the wet hill were the soldiers, a few women, and just one man. No, that man wasn't me. It was John. Among the women were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus.
"Woman,"
he said to his mother. She was crying so hard that John had to hold her up.
"Woman, let the man beside you be your son.
And to John he said,
She is your mother."
Hugging her tightly, John led Mary away from such sadness, and then almost no one was left on Golgotha. Now the clouds in the heavens shut down like a door, and the world became as black as night, and out of the darkness came a loud voice wailing,
My God,
It was Jesus. I could not see, but I could hear his cry rise up to the sky.
my God, why have you forsaken me?"
No one answered. No one answered him. I covered my face and did not move for an hour, for 2 hours. And then I heard my dear Lord murmur 2 soft words. He said,
"I'm thirsty."
So I crept out of my hiding place, and I took a sponge and filled it with vinegar and stuck it on a stick and reached it up to Jesus' mouth, and he drank. He drank. Did he know who I was? Did he know I was there? When he was done drinking, Jesus sighed.
"It is finished."
Then he said a little prayer, the one that children pray before they go to sleep.
"Father, into your hands I place my spirit."
What did I see that Friday? And what did I witness? I saw the head of Jesus sink down between his shoulders. I saw his body sag. I heard a long, long breath go out of his mouth, and I waited. I waited, but I never heard another breath go into him again. Jesus was dead.